welcome back to Bourbon Barrel Talk. I'm your host, Scott Minton. Today we are sitting down with Mr. Travis Hill at his house, and our special guest today is John Wadell with Peerless Distilling Company. How you doing today, John?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, we're glad to have you here. So we're going to find out what you guys are doing and Peerless is doing, and we're going to talk about all kinds of fun stuff and kind of navigate those waters. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself and then what you do at Peerless.
Yeah, so my name's John Wadell. I am the single barrel curator at Kentucky Peerless Distilling Company. So to put kind of summarize it there, basically, when barrels become of age, we have a tasting team that consists of myself, Caleb, our master distiller, Nick, he's one of our other distillers there, and I get to taste through all these barrels after maturation and become of age, and then help decide which ones go into the barrel program, which then I'll sell to private groups, restaurants, bars, enthusiasts such as everyone sitting here at this table pretty much, and do a little bit of fermentation, do some distilling down there as well, and a little bit of everything.
All right. So for one, how do you get on the list? And then two, what states are you currently distributed in?
We don't talk about the list.
Well, I mean, the list has to come through. So the list comes through distribution. He'll tell us that. But
don't share our secret. Then if we give out the list, then we don't get the list anymore.
So yeah, no, the list, because we keep in mind we do 10 to 12 barrels a day, and to keep you, give you an idea about production, your bigger distillers, they're producing 2,000, 3,000 plus. They do more in a day than we ever do in a year. So we limit ourselves. So we only do 50 bourbon and 50 rye. So we're talking 100 single barrels a year that we do. So right now the current list is about almost 2 years out. But keep in mind, I always like to tell people that list is very flexible. We have groups that don't select every year with us, new opportunities that come about that we want to pursue and things like that. So the list is like a love and hate thing. You have your certain groups that pretty much we take care of every year based on, certain things. And the second question was, what was the second question again?
Which states are you distributed in?
We're in about 47 states with the rye. Yeah. And about 27, 28 with the bourbon. So, the controlled states are a little bit the ones that are tough to tackle and things like that. But we try to make sure we have a wide distribution. Some states do better than others, but it's we're definitely all over the place.
So that's really interesting that you have such a variety and a gap between the bourbons and the ryes. I wonder what causes that, because your bourbons are catching. I guess they're catching on more. I mean, the double oaks. I mean, obviously those are probably fantastic. The two that I've had, I've loved both of them. Obviously, I'm really biased to double oak, but I wonder what kind of causes that gap, you think?
Well, I also think, the rye came out first and it had a two-year head start of the bourbon, right? So, I mean, the bourbon, we've only been out for about 2 years too as well. But, the rye had a good head start, and it's what we launched with. So, we went public with a rye whiskey, so we were able to reach a lot of markets ahead of time. Whereas the bourbon, you got to think, it's crazy when people think of like distribution, like, oh, you should just be able to send it anywhere. Depending on stores, everything else, I mean, not to get like too technical, but you're talking like about certain barcodes they have to get right, certain paperwork, permission from states and things like that. So it's a process to get stuff in. Then you got to think about labels, right? The TTB, getting labels approved and everything. So it's just it just doesn't happen overnight, and I think a lot of people forget that because, once again, we're all excited. Even I have the same way, like, why isn't that bourbon yet here? Like, why don't we have Smoke Wagon yet here in Kentucky, right, at one point? And then, it just takes time, and but we'll eventually be, we like to have a big distribution. I mean, we're even outside of the United States. You got to think, we've done picks of bourbon and rye with N10 over in the UK. We're in Australia. We're in Korea. So it's just all about what makes sense and what's the easiest and, the less like, what's what I'm looking for, just painful to try to get into some states and distribution.
Well, that makes a lot more sense then, because obviously people will typically, they'll drink a 3 or 4 year old rye, right? Like if it settles in right and it's got the right flavor profile. Whereas bourbons, they're a little bit more picky about, if it's not 4 years old, it's not really bourbon. People get a real big mystique about that, as far as that thing goes. So that makes 100% more sense. So I've been, kind of following through and watching what you guys are doing. And like Matt said, I'm more partial to some of the double oak stuff that you guys do. Tell us a little bit more about what that process looks like for you.
Yeah, it's crazy. The double oak, it was really I always like to say it was a happy accident. Double oak was nothing any intentionally when we started distilling and barrel and aging everything. It was nothing we ever were like, we need to have this as a portfolio piece, or or as an option. And then, as the years went on, we were first distilling, we were going back, refilling barrels. Because sometimes, you have barrels that have, like, leaks or something happens with them, you just got to transfer them into another barrel. And when we do these tastings within this group of ours, like I said, it's me, Caleb, and Nick, we keep everything imaginable out of sight. Like I said, we don't proof them, we don't look at the ages, we don't record them, we taste them, and then afterwards we go back. And so we were tasting some of these barrels, and we're like, what is this? Like, this is fantastic. So we go back in the rick house to look at some barrels, like, this is a double oak. And we were finding this, like, trend of some of these really unique flavor profiles, which is very different. So we started like, well, let's offer them as a single barrel. And so when we first, did the single barrel selections, we wouldn't even tell them sometimes, like, there was a double oak in there. We would just want to see what they thought and, thought of the barrel between, like, regular barrels. And a lot of people were picking, like, this is so different, fantastic, what is this? And we're like, oh, by the way, you picked the double oak that was in there. Yeah. Whereas now we purposely, Caleb, our master distiller, brilliant young man. I mean, you got to think, when he first started, he was one of the youngest people in the industry to ever do this, and he came from more of a science background rather than, I enjoy whiskey and bourbon, right? His thought process was, how can I make the best whiskey and bourbon? But he got to, shadow a couple good people within the industry and everything during that time, and really had a palate for it, and that was his main concern. But then, so now we purposely taste barrels. So when barrels become of age, basically after they're 4 years old, we'll go ahead and start tasting through them. And he's kind of helped us along the way to develop our palate and purposely look for barrels that double oak, right? Things that they may be lacking or need to calm down within them that are good candidates. Whereas now, that's what we do when we're tasting through barrels that become of age. We know we're looking for barrels that are great candidates for single barrels, ones that are good for the batches that he puts together, and then ones that we can say, this will be fantastic if we double oak this. And he's done a great job. We just released our small batch double oak last year, which got number 8 in Whiskey Advocate as one of the best top whiskeys in the world, which is crazy. And that was a mingle. Everything we do is a small batch, so it's only a mingle about 25 to 30 barrels, which I always try to tell people at that point, you're not just masking a bunch of flavor together. Like, each and every barrel that we select in these batches that he wants to put in there are hand selected for a reason. So, I mean, they all have a purpose within these batches, is not just as fillers. And not that I'm saying anything wrong with that, I'm just saying you have to be very careful when you do these small batches, especially with something as like double oak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we sat here last time I was on, was in this room, and we were talking about the best whiskeys of 2021, and it was my second favorite, maybe my first,
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it was the Peerless Double Oak for
yeah.
sure. It was top 2 for me, so.
And it was funny because that's the first time I never tried it. I've seen it out there, and then Travis liked it. So I was like, all right, well, Travis likes it.
If Travis likes it, we should try it more.
Most likely.
I liked it a lot.
He's got a great palate.
If Travis says he likes something a lot, there's probably going to be a case of it bought the next day. Let's just put it that way.
What's crazy about that with the small batch double oak that we released, we did 3 different batches. We have a 107 107 4, and a 107.9 on those.
Okay.
And the great thing about Peerless and what Caleb, wants to do there, and, Corky and Carson, our owners, is they're necessarily going to have a certain flavor profile. You can taste all 3 of the batches, and they're going to be a little bit different from one another, but they're always very well rounded, right? It's not too astringent in one flavor profile or the other, which also I find exciting. I love the fact that, from batch to batch, it's going to be a little different.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, are you guys going to, I guess my first question is, so you said the proofs come in at about 107, right?
No, I mean, it's all over the board right now. As we're getting to some of these older stuff, I mean, we just released we just came out with our new small batch rye. It was the 113.9 proof that we did,
Yeah.
and we just had a single barrel that was 120.1.
Nice. I'm sorry,
Wow.
I meant for the double oaked. Those were all
the double
coming
oak. Yeah, they
up.
were all coming out around like 107. Yeah,
So
sorry.
Do you guys like intentionally proof that to a lower level, or is it just like it just happens that
Just
way? and
happens.
it's awesome?
Everything we do is barrel strength. So literally, the only time we ever add water to that product is before it goes into the barrel. So we come off the still around 130, 131 proof. We'll proof everything down to 107 and then put it in the barrel. So I always like to tell people, our water is an ingredient, not a dilution. It gets to go, it's a little bit more soluble, so it's going to go inside that barrel, help extract a little bit more of that flavor and all that coloring too.
Yeah.
That's badass.
So you guys use a similar model to Michter's then, I guess, in that capacity. You're going at a lower proof point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Get that flavor bomb.
Yep.
And the
It's
fact
so
that,
good.
we're a sweet mash. So, I mean, we're using fresh ingredients every time. So there's no leftover, distillation that gets thrown back in the cooker. So we're drawing out the full flavor, which in return, we come off our still at a much lower proof typically.
Yeah.
And just holds up great. We taste our still every 30 minutes, by the way. I mean, we do 10 to 12 barrels a day. So we come out, if you're distilling, you taste it every 30 minutes and make that call, is this the Peerless distillate that we want to put in? Because coming out every 30 minutes, and we don't run 24 hours. We run pretty much 6 to 6, every day. You're tasting at the beginning, middle, and end of every barrel that you're tasting that day.
That's awesome. If you need someone hired to taste every 30 minutes,
Right? Yeah.
3
Don't
candidates
hire
right here.
him.
That's you want to hire somebody with a better palate than Matt.
Wow.
Someone who will show up on time and not have to leave immediately.
Definitely on time today. Still leaving on time.
He was on time.
I was on time.
So
Thank you very much.
There's a rough morning every now and then, you're going in there like, oh man.
Just need to put this in my coffee real quick. Hang on. I'm sure it's fine.
I just love all that attention to detail. It's not the most cost-effective way to do it. But the one thing I always tell people about Peerless is I don't know anybody that gets such a wide variety of flavor off their single barrels. I mean, you go to the gift shop and you run into mocha this and mango that and just everything. You got these names for all the barrels because you get these wild flavors, and they really do taste like that. And I think that is a credit to the attention to detail, the low entry proof, sweet mash, buying high quality barrels, non-chill filtering, all that stuff that you guys are doing that is not cost effective. It's not easy, but it's producing something very high quality and very unique, especially in the single barrel program, not to mention the batches.
Yeah, it's one thing about corking them. They never did anything to save a buck or two. That was never their goal. What's the cheapest route or how can we save $1 here? I always like to say, one thing we've always kind of adapted there is quality over quantity, right? Obviously we could expand, we could do a lot more, but then you sacrifice a little bit of that quality standpoint, right? So we get to see everything underneath one roof. I mean, we cook there, we distill there, we bottle there. One of our rick houses is right on site that we can age up to close to about 2,000 barrels right there too as well. So I mean, we see every bit of it, and we have a little bit unique, different process too. I mean, we don't do multi-level rick housing. All our rick houses are one story. So I mean, we go 5 to 6 high in them. We don't temperature control them either. The one at the distillery is a brick house, and what's interesting now is that we're getting to that point where we have product that's coming from our other rick house that we had built. We bought about 30 acres. We can build a couple more out there in Henry County, and it holds about 5,200. And it's aluminum, right, siding, but great ventilation. It sits on a hill, 2 big barn doors that open up to let that air flow right through. And we are seeing some great things. We just started pulling some samples from out there and starting to taste of these barrels. It was absolutely exciting to see the different flavor profiles and stuff like that we get out of them. But I will say, when it comes to the gift shop picks, there's always one ringer that we have there at the distillery. And, she helps taste through the barrels. Her name is Peyton. And she does a great job. So you're speaking about naming the barrels and how close they are. So a lot of times we'll go to her. We'll sit down with her and let her taste these barrels, and we're like, hey, what should we call this one? And she has a fantastic palate, and she helps name a lot of these barrels too. She helps out a little bit with the barrel program and stuff like that as well.
Shout out Peyton.
Yeah, Peyton, she's on. If you ever at Peerless, make sure you ask for her. She's down there. She helps run the gift shop, retail, and she's like our little behind-the-scenes taster.
Gotcha. So I assume the sweet mash is what attributes to the fact of what Travis was talking about, the fact that you get so many different flavor profiles out of, all the different things that you guys release. And you want to talk a little bit more about that detail of it?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously when we're tasting through single barrels and things like that, we have barrels for the program. But, our Caleb, our master distiller, he wanted to really provide something special for the people that are Peerless. All these people come in from out of town. One of the first questions is, well, what do you sell here? So he has a line of single barrels that he'll pick out when we're tasting through the barrels that he really likes and enjoy, and those are the ones we'll actually put through our gift shop there. And they're fantastic. Like I said, he has a great palate, and what's great about him is, you got to think, everyone's palate's different, right? So me and Nick were city boys. We grew up here in Louisville, Kentucky. Caleb grew up in Salt Lake, Kentucky. So sometimes it's not necessarily about what you're tasting, but where your mind takes you, right, when you're tasting through these barrels. I know it sounds crazy for anybody out there listening that everyone always talks about, what you're getting off your palate. But I mean, it really does. Like, there's been plenty of times you taste something and it brings back a certain memory. And his are more like out in the pasture, sitting on a farm somewhere, and we're like, we have no idea what you're talking about, but I know what you're talking about flavor-wise.
I totally get that, because one day I was talking about the fact that I got something that was leathery, but it tasted like baseball glove leather, and people acted like I was crazy when I said that.
Having being able to smell is being able to taste. Think about that. I think people forget that connection too, right? Sometimes you smell something, but you taste it, and that's why nosing is a big part. Because we're sitting here, some people are like, why do people nose it? I mean, you're priming your palate. It's all about that. What do they call it? That olfactory bowl, in the front part of your lobe there, that helps your mind and memory go together. But it's always a bit, again, kind of off top, but it's always interesting to see how Caleb tastes versus we do, and he picks some fantastic barrels to put up there to the gift shop.
Now, Scott, in retrospect, you're crazy normally, so just anything you say flavor profile wise, we're just going to take that with a grain of salt.
That is fair enough. But I would say I'm the best of both worlds, right? Like, I grew up on a farm.
Whatever helps you sleep at night, buddy.
Why would anybody say that?
Why would anybody
about
say
you?
Fair enough. But I will say,
No, I'm kidding.
I mean, as a kid,
No,
I lived on 8 or 9 acres, but my grandparents had a 400-acre farm. So I know what it's like to be a farm boy. Like, I know what it's like to bale hay. I know those type of things. And I remember those things about the fields and the tobacco farms that my grandma and grandpa on the other side of my family lived near, and things to that nature. So I remember those type of things as a kid. But I also, because I spent the later part of my formative years here in like the Louisville area, so it was always running around doing different things like that. So I can tie a lot of stuff to those memories as well. So, and that's what I always tell people is, for bourbon, it's a lot tied to your memory and olfactory and all the other senses that come with it. So that makes 100% sense why he picked something different than what you would.
And, that's the thing about, all three of us taste very differently, and we all have very different things that we like with inside things. So the great thing about our barrel program, which I love, is that, we're not just wheeling out barrels, right? Like, hey, we taste this barrel from this lot that day. We'll use all these 10 for the program. I don't enjoy necessarily earthy notes in my bourbon, whereas Caleb loves those. So the great thing about having a little bit of a diverse program is, I may knock a barrel, but am I knocking it because it's bad, or is it because I just don't like the flavor profile of it? Where when you have a team and a panel of this, Caleb respects everyone's opinion. So if Caleb absolutely loves a barrel, but myself or Nick or Peyton's like, I just don't know if that's single barrel quality, we just take it out. Like, he doesn't question it. He doesn't say, well, I want it in here. It's going to be in here. He may take it for himself and say, hey, I'm going to put this up front. But we all have three or four very different palates that what we enjoy and stuff like that. And I think that's really what helps the program and some of these diverse barrels that you'll actually come in and see when you come into Peerless, where, some of your bigger places or things like that, they want to stick with a certain flavor profile. They don't want to divvy outside of that, whereas we like to explore that wild side of the barrels that we have come through there.
One other thing that I really appreciate, and this is probably the thing that I appreciate the most about Peerless, is the actual bottle design, the cork design. Like, there's just seems to be a lot of attention to detail with, how you pick that and what it is. Can you give us a little bit more insight on how that happened, or do you know?
Yeah, it's a absolute beautiful bottle. It took about 2 years to design that, and Corky. So we're owned by Corky and Carson Taylor. Corky's son Carson, he's our president, and he helped build that. He used to be a builder. So if you ever been to the distillery, you come down there. It's an old tobacco warehouse we bought downtown, and he designed and did the whole layout. But he designed our bottle. It took him 2 years. We found a company outside of Atlanta, Georgia, that actually do our bottle. So it's virgin glass. If you notice, if you ever get a chance to get your hands on, it's no coloring or anything like that inside the bottle. It has Henry Craver's original signature, Corky's great-grandfather, who started the distillery in 1889, and it's based off our doubler. So if you ever seen what a doubler looks like, or you come down the Peerless, it literally looks almost like our doubler. We used a real cork, on top of there too as well. Has a solid piece of glass on there because if you look underneath the bottom, it even has our address on the bottom of the bottle just to show people that we didn't source any product. And for anybody that's a listener doesn't know exactly what that means, basically, when you start your distillery, you need product to sell. So some people will buy the barrels, they'll bring them back there, dump them until their product's ready, which is nothing wrong with that 100%. I love plenty of source stuff. We just chose as a distillery and family that we didn't want to do anything. We didn't want to source any products. So anything you get from us, we made right there in downtown Louisville.
So you mentioned the address on the bottom, and I literally have never noticed that. That's pretty cool.
I didn't notice that or didn't know that either.
If you look on the back label, we're also KLAS certified. For anybody that likes to be kosher, we are 100% kosher at the distillery. We have a rabbi that comes in quarterly, does a little blessing. We have a toast, checks the place out, and I find that pretty cool because most distilleries, a lot of people notice it, it's only like a part of their distillery that's kosher certified, where our whole place is actually kosher certified.
Good to know. Good to know.
So it's been interesting for me over the years to watch Peerless because I remember the beginning. I remember seeing the space and learning about the cost and then hearing about what the retail price was going to be and dealing with all of that and moving along, finally tasting, the young rye, and there was some moonshine there at first, and they're just like, hang on, just bear with us. And it's like, oh man, I don't know, $100 for a 2-year rye. Like, it's not bad, but like, that's crazy still. I get it. They spend a lot of money. Like, this place is cool. They're doing it right. We talk to enough people there and they say, look, man, just hang in with us. We're not going to be raising the prices. That can obviously change, but I fast forward here now, 6 or 7 years later, and the prices have not gone up. I think if anything, they've gone down a little bit. But the quality has grown into that, and I think you see what the vision is, or was and is still, with the high quality. It's awesome to me to sit here and watch all these years later, people finally starting to realize what good whiskey Peerless makes. Not just the bourbon, but now the rye, which was what people were kind of hating on. Because it was expensive and it was young. I get that. But now everybody got excited about the bourbon, and now you're starting to see, like, I want that rye. Like, give me that Kentucky rye. Give me that. My biggest thing right now is low proof, barrel proof. So if you can give me something at 107 that's barrel proof, like, dude, I'll do that all day long. Like, you can have your 130, 140. Like, that's cool. I like it. But this is what I want. Low entry proof, sweet mash, high quality ingredients, made in a facility that really cares about what they're doing. It costs them a lot of money to do it, to get started. You got a beautiful bottle. The people are amazing. Everything about it, it's just a high quality product, and I'm here for it all day long. So it's awesome for me to see where it is now, all these years later.
Yeah, I mean, I started there before we even had product out. So, I mean, it's crazy to see where we are. And kind of two parts to what you were speaking about. One, it was a little bit before my time. Like, I remember hearing about the price point and everything. And I think about it two ways. I'm like, man, someone was a genius, right? Like, we entered a 2-year ride to the market. I think it was like 124 when it first came out, maybe. And got tons of spotlight on it, right? Because of the price point. No one really tried it yet, but they were hearing what it's come out as. Would it have been that big of a spotlight if it just would have been a 2-year ride, right? Say at like $50-$40. So it's like one of those things you think about, like, was one of the popularity because everyone was talking about it because of the price point? I mean, it was good. Don't get me wrong, the quality was fantastic in it, in my opinion. But I also think, like, what if we would have came out at like, a $50-$60 rye? Like, would that even created any buzz or anything about it? Too. So, I don't know who ever came at that, but I think everything we've done has led us to the path we are now, as you said, like in our quality. We have never cut corners on a quality standpoint when it comes to anything we do down there too, which I absolutely love. It's never been about saving money or making things easier. Caleb, Corky, their main focus has always been, what's going to help us make a better product. And we've made changes. We made upgrades, things like that. We keep 2 different mash bills. The mash bills never change. But as far as, people don't think about it, it's like what pumps we're using. How fast are we pumping this in? What's our chilled water system look like compared to, our boiler system? All these things, the little tiny details that people don't think about, we are always improving behind the scenes. As far as equipment and things like that going and how we do things. But also think about, before Peerless came out their 2-year rye, and now we have our bourbon and everything else out. Who was really doing a sweet mash before then, though, too? I think Peerless kind of introduced something a little bit different. I know there was, but who really fully dedicated to their full time of doing sweet mash that had a rye out at the time?
Maybe Neely.
I said it's us, Neely, and Wilderness Trail. And I know
Yeah.
Wilderness Trail have blown up there and both places make an amazing product. But as far as like being in the spotlight, you had kind of
maybe Michter's.
Yeah.
I'd have to see.
But other than that, no one was really doing it full time. And I think Peerless did a great job at capitalizing on that too, and having something very unique and different. And not just that, but the history. The history behind it wasn't just some new distillery. It was an older brand that had been revived by the great grandson too.
So let's dive a little bit more into that piece of it, the whole history and heritage behind it. And then also, Travis had mentioned something about the fact quality of product, barrel, things like that. Are you guys getting barrels from multiple sources, or are you guys just pretty much sticking with one specific?
We stick with one place, and man, they are fantastic. If you've been out there and you probably have heard their name, they're called Kelvin Cooperage. Originally from Scotland, but based right here in Louisville now, and they're about 20 minutes away from the distillery. And the great thing about Kelvin's is they're still doing everything by hand, but when it comes time to char and heat up their barrels and everything, they don't use any gas or infrared for that process. So they take all that leftover oak from the barrel staves and the stuff that they're making, and then make these fire pits with it. So, it's all natural heat that they're going to put inside these barrels. And we do a medium toast with a level 3 char. And not a lot of people talk about toasting, or it's becoming more unpopular now, you're going to see. But, that was it's a great part about the barrel because, I always tell people, think about like a marshmallow. You've ever eaten a marshmallow out of the bag, it's pretty good. But how much better is it when you slowly roast it first? Get all that flavor, all that sugar and everything going inside. So we do a medium toast first. It takes about an hour long. And then we do a level 3 char inside of everything. So we don't differ or anything like that from that standpoint. But they're fantastic. They by far have some of the best quality barrels.
Gotcha. Now back to the history.
So the history, just a little bit about anybody out there listening for Peerless. We started back in 1889. So owned by Corky and Carson Taylor. His great grandfather Henry Craver started it. But he was a Polish Jew, came over from Poland, moved to like the Manhattan area, came over by boat when he was about 5 years old. When he was 9, 10 years old, selling newspapers on the corner, just trying to make a buck. But he moved when he was about 18, 19 years old. He had enough money saved up that his idea was he was going to get on a river boat. He was going to take all of his money, and wherever he ran out of money is where he was going to get off at. Doesn't make much sense, but, different times back then. So he took a boat all the way down to Henderson, Kentucky. If you're not familiar with that, it's about 2 hours west of here of Louisville, just right on the river. No one really knows why he passed up Louisville. It was a much bigger city at the time. But the family said, he was known to be a party animal. So they said he was probably drunk, gambling, or sleeping on the boat. So I don't think it makes sense why he would have passed up Louisville. But he ended up in Henderson, bought the distillery from a friend, Mr. Worsham, changed the name to Peerless. And at the time when he took it over, they were only doing about 10 to 12 barrels a week. But in 2 years, he had kind of spent a lot of money into it, bought him a brand new still, and they were doing, over 200 barrels during that time. Sorry, my voice. But before we closed down, we actually shut down our stills before Prohibition. He actually kind of saw it coming. We had our still shut down. Prohibition came along. There was 220 distilleries in the state at the time, and only 6 got a license to sell alcohol. So when you find some of our old Prohibition bottles, you won't see necessarily Peerless written on those bottles, but you will see Henry Craver's name being a producer of some of that alcohol. So we have a couple of old Prohibition bottles at the distillery. One which is unopened with the original tax stamp and seal on there. Super cool bottle. But you'll see it says the American Medicinal Spirits Company, but produced by Henry Craver. So we sold off a lot of barrels during Prohibition. And then obviously, our stills, cool little connection we have with Venom Copper and Brass, right? So everyone knows Venom Copper and Brass. They're one of the biggest leading or still manufacturers. So Mr. Worsham was the best welder in the time during that time. So Henry Craver had him come down, disassemble our sill, put it on a train cart, and take it up to Vancouver, where he reassembled up there. I'm sure to make brandy or whatnot. And because of that money, he started Venom Copper and Brass. And we found that out when we went to him to buy our still. Corky and Carson went in there, and they were telling him, who their family was. And Rob was like, hey, I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. And he brought the family back in. He told them the story hey, because of your great-grandfather, he put our great-grandfather in business, which is why now Venom Copper and Brass is around. So our history runs deep. If you know anything about DSP numbers and things like that, we have the original DSP number, which is your distilled spirits plant number, which is 50. So what's crazy to think about that is your government number. When you open up, the government issues you a number. Think about what Wild Turkey, right? They're 139. Maker's Mark 444. Buffalo Trace is 113, 116, somewhere around there. So they were around a lot longer than some of the original distilleries. We just didn't make anything over 100 years. So while we are a new distillery and we didn't copy the recipe or anything like that, it really wasn't about bringing back the recipe. It was bringing back the quality of the product. We got to keep our original DSP number, which I will say was the first time in government history the family actually was able to go back and claim original DSP number. Took him 2 years. He said 2 years, a lot of lawyers and a lot of money. He had to prove it, everything, who he was, but we're glad to be able to have that DSP number back. If we wouldn't have gotten that DSP number, to give you an idea of where it's at now, we would have been about 20,233 would have been the DSP number we would have got. Crazy, right?
That is pretty insane when you sit back and think about that. That's how much this industry's grown exponentially over the last, I would say probably 5 to 10 years. Wouldn't you agree, Travis and Matt? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
We're getting head shakes.
Yep.
If you would have came to Louisville, let's just say 5 years ago, 8 years ago, be a completely different vibe downtown to where it has, one of our leading incomes is, the tourism that we get here because of bourbon. You can go down almost anywhere downtown, walk in, get a pour of some bourbon, go into a distillery, tasting room, and it's great to see just the city thriving downtown with everything that's changed from being so industrial to now restaurants. Our cocktail and food scene here is amazing.
Yeah, Louisville's very much known for its foodie scene, and I think that the cocktail scene has just come right with it. So
we were talking about this before we got on the air about how now I think Louisville is the bourbon destination, not Bardstown. When I was coming here 5, 6, 7 years ago, you flew into Louisville Airport and drove straight to Bardstown and stayed down at the Hampton Inn. That's not that way anymore. You got to stay in Louisville. There's more distilleries here. There's more gift shop releases here. There's more restaurants. There's more bars. Blah, 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 blah. This is the place to be. So I love Bardstown. I'm not taking anything away from Bardstown, but things have changed in my opinion. And Louisville is definitely one of the coolest places in the country to be right now. If you want to be involved in spirits and in that vibe, this is the place to be.
I'll get some groups that come in every now and then. They'll be like, oh, where you staying at? Because when they come to buy a barrel, they see this, so oh, we're staying in Bardstown, but we should have stayed in Louisville. And it's no knock, like you said, no knock against Bardstown. There's just
you can do
so
both.
much happening here. Yeah. That people want to be here because of all the bars, restaurants, and things like that we have here.
Yeah, 100%. Well, hey, I greatly appreciate you coming on the show and everything else. Do you want to tell people where they can come to Peerless or how the best way to find you guys or to follow you and things to that nature?
No, absolutely. So, if you're ever in Louisville, we are at 120 North 10th Street. So if you're familiar with the Louisville Slugger building downtown, we are a block up from that. Just take a right on 10th Street and we're right there on the left. We do tours and tastings. We're open Monday through Saturday from 10 to 5. You can reach out to me personally at my email, or you can find me on social media at Instagram at Sir_J Wadell, or find me on Facebook at John Wadell. But yeah, or you can reach out to me at email. It's john@KentuckyPeerless.com. If you have a group, bar, restaurant, anybody that's interested in getting that single barrel.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you want to find Bourbon Barrel Talk, you can find us on all of our social media outlets. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also email us at bourbonbarreltalk@gmail.com or message us on any of those other avenues as far as the social media goes. You can also make sure you hit the subscribe button. We're on all of the outlets out there, whether it be iTunes, Spotify. That's my personal favorite, and everyone else. So this is Scott, Matt, John, and Travis signing off. Peace.
Later.